Okay, so uh, we are going to talk about the sound science, how we understand and how we acquire the sounds from the early childhood, and how this is going to affect us in later developmental stages of language acquisition and those kind of things. So I am sure as a teacher, you have experienced this feeling that sometimes your students cannot get the words right in terms of pronunciation. It gets frustrating, and you ask yourself, "So why this is happening?" So I had the same frustration until I came across some theories and some ideas. I found them very interesting, and it helped me understand or have a better kind of view in terms of what actually happens in the brain and what actually happens in terms of development of the sound acquisition in terms of language development. So this is coming from a think tank issue that we had on pronunciation. If you are interested, you can go back and check that in that issue, of course. So as you can see, this is a kind of outline that I'm going to cover. We will talk about some key concepts like the critical period. Then we talk about the two theories that we have, the native language magnet and the neural commitment. Then we will talk about a very interesting and important idea about social gating. And eventually we'll talk about what happens in the brain, or what the function of mirror neurons is in the brain in terms of these kind of ideas. So most of the ideas are coming from the work done by Dr. Kuhl. You can see the references at the end, but this is basically, she has done a lot of amazing research over the past years on sound science or sound acquisition. And basically one of the fundamental ideas is that we experience a systematic decline in the ability to acquire a language at the age of 7. So if you take a look at this diagram, you will understand what we are talking about. We are not saying that after the age of 7, the language acquisition stops. We are just saying that, I mean, the theory is saying that we will experience a kind of decline in terms of language acquisition, in terms of a score, in terms of a speed, in terms of quality. So it doesn't by any means that this is the end of the story at the age of 7 or something like that. There is another idea here that babies are citizens of the world, and there is a reason for that, because they can distinguish all of the sounds or all of the phonemes in the languages. And we will put that in perspective later when we talk about the number of the languages, actually, number of the sounds. So they are citizens of the world because they can distinguish the sounds, but they become language-bound listeners by the age of 1. And later, as adults, we are all culture-bound listeners because there are other factors involved, like the context, the language, and other things that are not the focus of this presentation. So we are mainly focusing on what happens at the beginning or earlier stages of the development in terms of sound, distinguishing different sounds. So again, as I said, to put that in perspective, we are talking about 600 consonants and 200 vowels when we are talking about baby's ability to distinguish these kind of sounds. That's why Patricia Kuhl calls them citizens of the world. And there is a very interesting experiment that I will share with you in a moment. The experience is trying to understand if babies can distinguish the sounds. So let's just take a quick look at this video, because it just explains everything clearly. It's just less than a minute. So let's take a look at what happens actually.
Language. So let's watch a baby in this test.
Can a baby as young as 6 months old hear the difference between two vowels? This baby is trained to look for the toy when the sound changes. She's being distracted, so she'll turn only when she hears the difference in sounds. The key question, will she turn before the toy lights up?
So as you see, this microsecond of turning her head to the toy before it lights up is the key point here, that it shows us that babies like this baby have the ability to distinguish the differences between vowels under these kind of circumstances, in this kind of research strategies and all of those things, they can distinguish the sounds at the very early stages of life when they are so young. So that is something that we can keep in mind, but we have a kind of explanation for this. And the explanation is what is actually happening? How do they do this? And they do that according to the theory by taking the statistics, analyzing the ambient language in the environment. They are not like adults because we rely on the memory or rely on the patterns that are already established, but babies are not like that. They are constantly taking statistics, observing the environment. To go a bit deeper, not too much, about this mapping through statistics, we have this idea that this ability of looking at the, or actually in this case, listening to the sounds in the environment and mapping those kind of sounds in different categories, takes these babies actually to the next level. They are now language specialists because they know about these kind of patterns. The other thing that is important here is that all of this process is happening in the first year of life, before they can speak themselves, before they can form words, or before they can even understand meanings. It's all about sounds. It's all about the things that they can actually physically hear. And again, as I said, all of this is happening through the phonetic patterns, or the statistical analysis of the phonetic patterns. I will show you a kind of diagram later to just make that clear. But this part is the very important part of this idea, that no matter what language you are speaking as an adult, as you can see in the bottom, you can see no speaker of any language perceive acoustic reality. It means as adults, we already have form patterns, we have already culture-bound listeners, or we are language-bound listeners, so we cannot actually do this statistical analysis when we are listening to the sounds, because there are other factors involved, like the patterns are already formed in the brain and all of those other factors. The point is, as you can see, again, I'm emphasizing on some key areas here, like here, for example, we're talking about the 10-month period. The critical point would be that the perception of the sound is altered, or whatever you want to call it, changed, altered, affected, influenced, or warped by these patterns. So for example, just to make it clear, if we have a baby in an environment that is the English is spoken, so this baby is exposed to the English language, statistically this baby can categorize, for example, 8 vowels in the English language. On the other hand, if this baby is in an environment that Japanese is spoken, in that environment, statistically speaking, again, that baby can categorize, for example, 5 vowels. And all of this is happening because, as I said, they are mapping through the statistics, they are analyzing the sounds, and they are forming the pattern at very early stages. So this is the critical period. So one aspect of critical period is time related, and the other aspects we will talk later. We have some important theories here. I will mention 2 of them. The first one would be the native language magnet theory. The name suggests itself that, okay, we are talking about how these kind of patterns, how these kind of prototypes that we will talk about later is going to alter the underlying network of understanding the sounds, and how they are going to create a kind of filter through which language is perceived. Filter is the key words here because it has 2 functions, as you can see in the next parts. So by 6 months of age, these babies, or this linguistics experience, has language-specific phonetic prototypes. These are the categories that they formed by statistically observing and analyzing the sounds in their ambient language. So they formed a prototype, and this kind of changed how we look at these sound systems, because prior to these discoveries in the research, we thought that they are the byproduct of the language acquisition because they can produce sounds or those kind of things. But after this kind of understanding, we know that they are these cognitive building blocks. So they are the foundation that you can actually build on to form other forms or more complicated forms of the language. They are not the product, they are happening way before that stage. We have another theory which is about neural commitment theory. Just to put that in perspective or to explain it, it's just imagine that we have two adults. One of them learned, both of them are bilinguals. One of them learned two languages at very earlier stages, and the other one learned the second language as an adult. When we scan their brains, we understand that the first one who learned the second language, we see some overlapping regions on the brain. But the second one is we are looking at two different areas active when we are talking about the later stages. This is another sense that we are talking about critical stages. So based on this native language neural commitment theory, the exposure to language commits the brain's neural circuitry. So this is a kind of blessing and a curse. The blessing is because it increases learning for more complex structures like words, like later meaning. You can build on this. So this is something good. We have patterns, we have systems in action. But it is a curse because it decreases the acquisition of non-native patterns, hence filtering this, that we talked about at the top of this part. So we have this neural commitment. It is kind of helpful and not helpful that much in terms of after the critical period. So far we talked about the critical period. We talked about the magnet and the neural commitment theories. Then we go through another very interesting and important thing, and that is the social gating idea or hypothesis. This is very simple, and it says that human beings are necessary in terms of this statistic data analysis. It means the baby is analyzing the environment, listening to the sounds, but this should come from the human source. They cannot learn, or they do not learn that much from non-human sources like videos or audios. Let's just take a look at this. For example, just imagine that we're talking about some target sounds in Mandarin, and we have two groups of babies. One is exposed to the Mandarin, and the other one is not exposed to English. And when we say exposed, we are talking about the exposure from to a source which is human being. And as you can see that the language acquisition increases over time, but the second person, the second group, which is exposed to English only and not Mandarin, you can see that there is not much improvement. The same goes to TV and audio sources, as you can see here. So basically, Kuhl had a kind of very strict hypothesis at the beginning, which changed over time, that this only happens if the source is human being. But they changed this. I mean, it evolved throughout the years. I will explain that later. So the social context that we are talking about has some characteristics that are non-existent, or they are minimalized in other sources like videos or audios. It all boils down to this idea of interaction and communication, because here the social brain is involved, and the baby is actually paying attention to communicative intentions and the sensitivity to joint visual attention and the desire to imitate, which we will cover in the last slide. So this is the reason that why, or we can actually explain why the sources should be human and the other sources like video and audio is not working that much. There is a common idea in the teaching environment or in the teaching literature that feedback and reinforcement are necessary aspects of language acquisition, but this group of studies shows that they are not important, or they are not necessary. They are important, but they are not necessary in terms of language acquisition. Other things are important. In terms of sound acquisition or sound learning or later pronunciation, we have some characteristics like exaggerated acoustic cues. We have multiple instances by many talkers. We call them exposure to the language or the intensity of the exposure, and mass listening experiences, which has a direct correlation between the effectiveness of language acquisition. In order to explain that, Patricia Kuhl actually coins the terms of motherese, Motherese is a language that we talk to the babies with the exaggerated sounds and all of those things. We will take a look at a very short clip. But later again, Motherese changed to Fatherese, and now the more politically correct term for that is caregiverese. And that is the language that we use when we talk to the babies. Let's take a look.
So listen to two mothers speaking Motherese, the universal language we use when we talk to kids. First in English and then in Japanese.
Ah, I love your big blue eyes. So pretty and nice.
うわー、大きな茶色いお目目。そして綺麗な黒い髪。
So listen to two.
So if we take a look at this data below this, by the way, this is the Motherese. I am sure that everyone is familiar, or caregivers, everyone is familiar with this kind of pattern of language, exaggerated sound, crystal clear pronunciation, or lingering actually the pronunciation or the sound production to make it more understandable and to make the connection more easily. But if you take a look at these diagrams here, you can see that these diagrams follow a kind of same pattern. So that is the reason we call it, Patricia Kurz calls that the universal language. But if you take a look at the things that are missing here, for example, the English R for the English speaker is very important or very dominant, and the English L is dominant, but in the Japanese speaker, the Japanese R is dominant. So basically what we are trying to say here is the baby, when the baby is exposed to this language, as we said, they are statistically analyzing and everything, they are not even listening or hearing that sound. So you cannot expect them to develop this pattern later, and you cannot actually expect them to master this sound production in the later stages of development. This is a very interesting idea because this is the modified version of the first hypothesis that we said it is only from the human resources. But over the years that they have done other researches that actually modified this hypothesis. So it is not only humans, as you can see in this part. It is also possible that the babies learn from videos, but the videos should be kind of interactive, or there should be an element of communication and interaction. So if it is a touch screen video, that changes everything. That is the element about the social necessity, about the social gating hypothesis, that in terms of, it confirms two hypotheses actually at the same time, that learning from a screen would be enhanced in the presence of a peer. It means even if this peer is in the room with the baby, or if it is a level of interaction with the screen itself, like touching the screen, that increases the learning. Also, social partners enhances learning even from a screen, as we talked about. This is just one picture of a baby in the experiment touching the screen and trying to understand what is going on. So we talked about critical period, two hypotheses, and the social gating hypothesis or theory. Now it is actually a theory. Last stop would be this idea that, okay, we know all of this, but what actually happens in the brain? And the thing that happens is not limited to humans. It is something that happens when we want to, for example, in non-human primates like monkeys, seeing an action and producing itself is almost the same, or they are equivalent in terms of neurons active in the brain. So we call that, as you probably know, we call that the mirror neurons. It means when you are looking at something, the areas of the brain are activated like you're doing it something or something like that. So basically, we are talking about the link between the sensory and motor experience. It means sensory. So let's put that in the perspective of the thing that we are talking about. Sensory experience is the sounds that the baby is exposed to, the ambient language, the caregiverese, or that kind of input that the baby is analyzing and taking statistics. This is going to form auditory patterns, as we talked about. We call them prototypes. We call them the foundation systems, that everyone is having that, but there is a critical point in terms of development of those patterns. And this is going to be in later leading to these kind of motor approximations. So when the baby is in the later stages of the sound production, because of these sensory input and because of those prototypes, the baby is trying to actually produce the same sound. This is the same pattern that we can see in some birds when they see, for example, when they hear the songs, as when they are little, they try to, so this is the sensory part, they form the pattern and try to practice in producing the same sound until they hit the perfect tone. And as I said, this is true in non-human primates. So basically, the babies are doing the same, going through the same process. That's what I said, that this is not limited to humans in that sense, in terms of sound production. We share this quality with some other species. It's about having the input or sensory information, forming the patterns or prototypes, and later producing and trying to match those patterns. So then we can say that, okay, this is the thing. But the point is, this doesn't happen if the baby does not hear the sound, as we could see in the thing that we had in the video, for example. If the Japanese speaker is not producing the sound, the baby is not listening to, so these patterns are not even formed. So let's wrap it up. To me, the reason that this is important is because we can have different approaches to this kind of information. One would be, okay, we have the critical stage, it is real, but what should we do that? Should we design course for babies, or is it too early, for example, to expose babies to those kind of ambient languages? That is another discussion. Another discussion or another approach would be in terms of understanding the learners that we have as adults, trying to understand which language they were exposed to, which prototypes they formed, or what they can do to improve their prototypes later. Because if you remember, the research didn't say that it is impossible. It's a matter of understanding what actually happens. These are just the list of references that I use for this presentation. Just leave it here for a few seconds. And yep, I would take any questions if you have any, and then if not, we can go back to the main room together. Thank you, Sky, for sharing the link, by the way.
That was really interesting, Mohammad. You have done so much interesting. This is kind of a diversion, but as you were first talking, I'll put it in the chat, about babies and how the little video of the baby. When I had my kids, and my eldest is 16 now, but when I had small babies, this was really popular, this Dunstan's baby language. Have you heard of this?
Yep. And
I found there were a couple of cries that the baby made that I knew instantly this was hungry and this was tired. So it was really interesting that the response, like the mother's response, is actually, I think we develop our own ears to their speech as well, the baby speech. But I've heard there's lots of course, so much research for and against all these things.
Yeah. I mean, the point is, at least through these researches, we understand how it is going, how it is analyzed, and how it is statistically perceived in the baby's world, let's say. That's the interesting part for me, that, okay, we can sit here and theorize everything, but when we see that in action, that is actually a different level of understanding. So that's what made me interested in this kind of area. Yep, that was nice.
That makes a lot of sense, though, really. And I have read other things, some of Nina Krause's work about this, the Japanese and the, was it American or who is the English-speaking mother? That the babies are not even hearing a certain sound. So of course they're not. That's not the sound that they're focusing on, because that's not the sound that they need to hear or make.
I mean, it changes everything when we are dealing with adults. As teachers, we can easily get, as I said, we can easily get frustrated that why can't you pronounce that sound or that word correctly? But later, when we go deeper in the background, we say that, okay, you have never been exposed to that sound, so you're actually, it's not your fault that you cannot even hear it first, and then of course you cannot produce it if you're not hearing it. Kind of helps you understand the situation better. I mean, it helped me understand the situation better when I was dealing with mispronunciation in the classroom. So I hope it helps others.
It's not a priority if it's for the ear.
Exactly. Okay, thank you very much. If there is no other questions, we can, I think, go back to the main meeting. I will stop recording.